Well, hello, selectors, and welcome back to the Life First podcast. I have a special guest with me. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Joe. I'm better known online in the Wixoss land as the Real Quaid. I most famously recently took Carnival to the GP in Vegas and finished top eight, and I suppose that's what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah, that is actually what I brought you here. Other than like us brain sourcing for our next recent surprise. You and I were on a recent surprise team,
Yes,
and we did the 3v3. Uh,
yes. We also had a brief live in-person meetup with all three of us, and took a picture together, which was wild because I didn't even
True.
realize Tommy was there, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm Bubble Person." I was like, "Whoa, whoa, what?" So yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah, I unannounced just jumped into your guys' arms, and then we took a photo.
Yeah, well, we said we were going to take the photo, and then they were just like, carry me, hold me. I was like, all right, sure,
Yeah,
that's fine.
that's me in a nutshell. If you meet me in person, is really stupid decisions as quickly as possible made.
There's nothing wrong with that. It keeps things exciting.
Yeah, but speaking about like the GP, before we get super into the deck list and how awesome you did with Carnival, how was your GP, man? How was Vegas?
It was cool. I mean, the first thing I think of is hot because it was 114 like in the morning when you
Consistently,
wake
yeah.
up. It was like so hot the whole weekend. Thankfully, most of it was inside, but it was cool. I spent the first day, I got there really early because my flight, I'm on Eastern time. My flight left Indianapolis at 4 a.m. and I landed at 6 a.m. local time. So I had a bunch of time to kind of chill. The hotel was about probably about a mile from the strip. So I
Hmm.
walked to the strip, which was a little bit of a mistake because A, it was so hot and dry, and B, I like didn't really prepare to like walk that far in that heat. So I gave myself blisters on the way. I was like, man, this was a terrible idea. But it was cool, like exploring the little bit of Vegas that I did and seeing them all there. I walked to the Bellagio fountains, even though they were not on because it was like noon at that point.
Yeah.
But it was cool. It was also really great, like also just meeting everybody because a lot of names you kind of see, and especially if you're in the discords, right? You see all these names and they kind of like don't have as much meaning. But now that I've seen these people in person and met them, they're like, oh, I'm so and so, and like now I like know who they are. So it makes like sort of future interactions a lot more meaningful, which is really sweet.
Yeah, it feels like I should like stick my face down in the like because normally I have the cameras on the like on our hands and the cards. It feels like I should stick my face down there at some point with some of you guys and just be like, "Hey, how are you
Yeah, I will
doing?"
say, yeah, you look nothing like I thought you would have. Just, I don't know what I thought you looked like, but I saw you. The only reason I knew who you were is because I saw Tiffany's hat. I was like, I bet that's Andrew.
Yeah, that's why I decided
Um,
to stick around closer to Tiffany. I was like, people aren't gonna know who I
yeah,
am unless I'm speaking.
yeah, pretty much.
Hey, speaking of the Bellagio, man, I did actually visit the Bellagio. It was like the last thing I did before I left Vegas, and I went to their botanical garden that they've got there, which is gorgeous. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but it's like inside and gorgeous.
I
Um,
did not. Yeah, I went there. Like I said, it was noon. The fountains weren't on, and I wasn't about to walk any further than I needed to in 115-degree heat and full sun. So I was like, I'll just come back later, maybe.
yeah, I refused to see anything that was on the outside. I only saw the inside of these hotels, which are massive and crazy. If you guys ever go to Vegas, but so I went to the inside and I went to the botanical garden, and while I was there, it kept playing songs. And I was like, I feel like I know this, and it wasn't until they played a Hollow Knight song that I was like, oh my god, they're playing nothing but video game music, and it was like filled with tourists that have absolutely no clue. And like I even heard one of them be like, oh, this orchestral music is perfect for this scene, and I'm like, it's Hollow Knight.
That's so weird. Was there something going on there, or was it like just
No, no,
random?
no, no. So an interesting tidbit is a lot of video games make a ton of extra revenue by selling their music rights to like commercials and like TV shows, right? They never really sell them to movies because movies are too many people go see them, but they sell them to these other venues that don't have as many people that go through them, so it's harder for them to be like, "Oh, that's Mass Effect." You know?
That's really cool. I was wondering because I know like next week I'm also a video game person, as you might imagine, and next week is EVO, which is the big fighting game tournament that happens in Las Vegas. So I know a lot of video gamers are going to be there next weekend as well, playing fighting games all weekend.
Yeah, I heard there's a Magic event also happening in Vegas soon, so I guess we just got there at the beginning before they
Yeah,
all
that actually
started.
maybe because I think there was a GP this weekend. I don't know if that was in Vegas or not.
I think
I'm a Magic player, but I don't pay attention to the professional scene really at all.
yeah, I backed out of Magic when WeCross came out and put WeCross my full attention to it. But anyways, speaking of WeCross for our full attention, let's talk about this Carnival list, man. So first questions first, I guess. What brought you to bringing Carnival to the GP in the first place?
So the really funny thing is I as soon as they announced the GP, they're like, we're gonna have this in-person tournament. I was like, cool, I'm gonna play Anne because Anne is like my favorite Elrig. It's like I have this weird relationship with her where she. So I started playing Wii Cross. I shouldn't say started playing. I played very casually in when it first came out in Japan, and I imported some of the cards because I like them. And this I one of the sets I bought. It was one of the like it wasn't the first batch of L rigs that they had, but it was the second one. So it had like basically what we got in the second Welcome Back. So it had Anne, Iona,
Yeah, yeah.
Aldera, stuff like that. And I pulled like a bunch of Anne stuff, and I was like, oh, she's kind of cool. So it almost felt like she had chosen me type of thing. And she also the play style of her is sort of aligns with what I like in terms of setting up walls and being really defensive and kind of winning through attrition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I've always had this attachment to Anne. I was like, cool, I'm gonna bring Anne. And then they announced the whole like top L rig prize that whatever the top L rig of each type is gets the sleepy. And at that point, I already had the Anne sleepy, and I was like, I don't really want another one. I want to get something that I don't have. So the like literally the entire impetus for me picking Carnival is because I wanted the sleepy and I didn't have it. And I figured it'd be one that was like relatively easy to get, to be honest, because I didn't think there'd be a lot of people playing her.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's kind of how it went. And it worked out too, because like strictly speaking from a power level perspective, like Carnival is a much better center than Anne is.
That's
So I was
true.
like, okay, I can make this work. And I kind of, played around with it and explored the tech and really came to like how she plays because she's a very flexible, resilient type of center that can do a lot of different things and can go a lot of different directions.
Yeah, unbeknownst to a lot of people, Carnival. This isn't actually Carnival Center's first GP top eight. Actually, there was a GP top eight with Carnival once prior to this in Japan, but it was again I think it was eighth place, so it wasn't super high up on the listings. I don't think people made a big fuss out of it. It very much disappeared in Japan's love of like atoms, pretty quickly.
I mean, that's certainly understandable because that was one thing I played my matchup. So I played my sixth round game was against Kentaro, who ended up winning the whole thing with Deus Adams. And then I faced him in the first round of the top eight. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's an extremely skilled player, so I don't think I was really going to get out of it anyway. But that matchup, like playing Carnival against that deck, like it literally felt like there were no answers that I had because he's just a faster, more efficient deck, and anything that I do is just like going to be too slow or too inefficient to get to where I need to. And that's basically exactly how it went down. So
Yeah, that makes sense. There's not a lot of time to set up like you do get this sort of time to set up against these Esper decks. They at least love to give you time. Whereas the Adams deck is just lean mean, just get it done and move on machine.
yeah, and that's kind of throughout the day that I had as well. I played a lot of Esper style decks. There was a mono white deck I played, um, and then again I played Kentaro, who was the Dace Adams. But I believe the other five matchups that I had were some element of Esper control. Either I faced two Tama centers, I faced two Madoka centers, and I faced an Aya center. So they were all kind of that same family of decks, which Carnival really seems to match up extremely well against, again, for those efficiency reasons. And like
Hmm.
she's a little bit slower than aggro, but she can play kind of a more resource generation mode. Like if I need
Hmm.
to draw cards or generate enter or whatever I need to do, she has the tools to like back me up with that.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, it's just it amazes me at WeCross that sort of like what you just said the difference between player and player from from a player's perspective. Like, so you and I were dancing in the top tables throughout the entire event, right? Like, we even made a joke at one point where before we were actually faced up next to each other because we were each other's last round, we were shoulder to shoulder for most of the event in the higher end tables, and be like, oh, good to see you again, sir. You know,
Yeah.
and you had a completely different experience than me. I played a single control deck in the event, whereas you played like nothing but control deck. I played nothing but aggro decks, and that's just Wecross at work, man. The diversity of Wecross, where that want of those sleepies or the want to rep the best version of whoever your center Elrig is, almost like Commander and Magic, just really diversifies the playing field and changes it from player to player.
Yeah, it really did. I don't know if you saw Hellfire posted the actual counts of the centers that they had. He posted it earlier today.
Ooh, I
And it was
haven't
really
taken a check
interesting to
yet.
see. What was that?
I haven't taken a check of it yet.
It's like a really interesting look. Let me see if I can find the picture of it. Because, like, I mean, like from a numerical perspective, right? You sort of expect there to be really popular centers and stuff like that, but like, Tama was the most at 14.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's because Tama repped two different decks. There was the mono white aggro deck, and then there was the Esper deck. So it kind of got this like this difference between both of them, just sort of lumped together.
right, yeah. And then, like, if you go a little bit further down, I'm trying to do this from memory because I can't find it
Yeah, no
really
worries.
quickly. But like, it really quickly dropped off. Like, Tama was the most. There were a few like Deus decks, stuff like that, but like almost all of the L rigs were like represented by four decks or fewer.
Yeah, yeah, which makes sense to me too, because when I was looking over the top decks, right, I saw Atoms, I saw white aggro, I saw red aggro, and I saw Esper. And I expected sort of all of those things to be at the top decks of things. But the funny thing about the is the red aggro, the white aggro, and the Esper, they had different Elrig centers, especially with the Esper one, right? There was Tama, there was Madoka, I saw a Deus Esper, I saw a Tamago Esper, and I saw an Aya Esper, and I saw a Yuka Yuka Esper even. So like there was you just like were divided a bunch.
Yeah, it was. I just sent you a link. I don't know if you can get that in the screen share or not. But yeah, it was Tama was the lead at 14, Deus was 9, X was 8, Harana was 8, Tamago was 6, and then there were a bunch of like Aya was 5, and then everybody else is 4 and under. Which, like, again, numerically, when there's 108 decks and there's however many 30 some centers, like, it makes sense. But also, I was like, oh, there was really not that much competition. But like, if you were one of the real players, like, you were only against two other reals, and same thing with Carnival, and like there were two Ionas. But it was really diverse because, like, again, part of that too is this like top center prize. It's such an interesting idea because not only does it force people to play suboptimal decks, but it forces them to stick around, which is really cool because then they want to, if you're playing against one other person for a sleepy, like, that's kind of a cool prize, and you'll stick around all 7 rounds instead of like losing two and immediately dropping.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear you say it, being that you were the sole I believe 5-2 in the top eight, right? So
Yes, that's correct.
breakers do matter, right? Like if any of the guys that you played and beat were like, "Yeah, I'm just done," and they stopped playing, it could have knocked you out top eight contention.
Yes, it would have shuffled up things completely. So most of actually, I have no idea what my earlier round opponents did. I know I played Pigeon, I believe, in round 4, and Pigeon also ended up making top
Top
8.
eight, yeah.
And obviously, I played you and Kentaro, who were also in top 8. Also the fact that I started 5-0, like, my earlier rounds would have been whatever, but the fact that I started so strong and didn't lose until round 6, like, I was probably still going to make it, but again, you never know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I went 4-1, so I was less I was on shakier ground than you technically. But
Right, but
yeah,
I mean, you still ended 6-1, which is the magic number,
right,
really.
right, sure, 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 sure. But it wasn't like our game wasn't extremely close too.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it was literally as close as it could possibly be.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's talk about some of this deck that you've put together. So you knew you wanted to go to Carnival. Carnival is a strange L rig in the fact that one, it's just a strange L rig, because it's got a lot of abilities that we haven't really seen on L rigs before. The closest thing I can think of is it's got like Gaybolg or like green Elrig energy, and the fact that it can gain energy per turn. So you had this anomaly of an Elrig, but you chose to package it in this overall like blue black resource denial, slightly aggressive, maybe more mid range esque type of deck. Can you talk about your process as sort of like building the deck concept as a whole rather than just the specific cards?
Sure. So obviously the first thing you look at is like, okay, what does the L rig do? So you look at the abilities. The first ability is you discard a card and then stuff happens. And throughout so I'm partially like a Johnny, which is a combo player type of thing. So
Hmm.
as you go through the sets, there are cards that stick out as being like, oh, this is kind of an interesting combo effect. Which earlier on it was things like, oh, I can't even remember the name of it. There was a Signy that came out, a level 2, that was like if you've discarded
Hijikata.
one card this turn, it gets power, and then if you've discarded two cards this turn, it also forces your opponent to discard. Um, which was a cool thing in the early days with like, Madoka Float and just the Madoka Center type stuff.
Yeah,
So I was like
You
looking
had
into that at first.
Senga Lancer to give it Lancer, and it discarded at random. It was
Yep.
Hijikata.
Hijikata, that's correct. Yeah. So stuff like that. Like I knew there were Signy out there that existed. I also had picked up a playset of the Alos Pure Look when it came out because I was like, this card's not very expensive. And it seems like it's got a really powerful effect if you can take advantage of it. And then, of course, Carnival comes out, who is literally the ability to discard on command and take advantage of Pure Look. It's like, okay, these two are natural partners. So like from there, I knew I immediately was like, okay, I'm probably just gonna have to play blue, which isn't the end of the world because blue is like a strong, powerful color and it gives you access to like Madoka assist line, which is obviously very good. So that like to me, I was like, okay, I'm probably just gonna run Madoka because then I can run Pure Look. And then the other color, I almost like from the beginning, I was like, it's probably gonna be black because it's really easy for black to like subtract power without much cost. And I knew in the very first set when I was playing Sanbaka, there was a Signy that would just give a free minus 1,000, which is with Carnival's once per game is a free banish. And then I took that and expanded it. I literally did a search. I was like, okay, what Signy subtract 1,000 power? Because that's going to be the cheapest effect. And then I found Erebus, which does it for everything. And I was like, okay, this is like the perfect natural combo with the once per game.
Hmm.
So that was basically like from setting up the deck as far as colors are concerned, it was pretty well determined, like right out of the gate, what I was going with. And then as I started to expand out, I was like, okay, I thought about doing white. I did see the video that you posted not too long ago about your Carnival deck where you have the white with the Firefly Squid because the Firefly Squid also is a perfect natural combo with Carnival. Um, and I actually thought about even teching in Firefly Squid with no white just to get the effect, but it felt too cute for lack of a better term. Like this is like something that kind of matters, but I'm not really doing hand denial type stuff to make it
Yeah,
really matter.
probably good that you did. I was pointed out on the video too that it is a because Carnivals is part of the cost. It actually doesn't trigger Firefly Squid. There's other things to
Oh,
trigger Firefly Squid in that deck, like Monoman and a couple other ways to discard from the field as effect. But yeah, it doesn't trigger there.
that's good to know. Okay, then I'm definitely glad I didn't do that. So yeah, that like just being in those colors, it seemed to naturally pair with what she was doing. So yeah, I ran with the Madoka assists because obviously she's really powerful. The original iteration of the deck had Machina assists, which again, very powerful generic assists. And as I
Hmm.
went more into it, I was like, you know what? There's a lot of like weird combo cards that I really want to have access to. Being in red, a lot of their lane clearing requires enter. So if I do need enter charge, if I'm facing, enter burn, or if I'm just using all my enter already on other effects, like having access to the enter charge from Nanachi selection seemed like it would be a good natural fit as well. So even though she costs more enter than Machina up front, she can make up for it by either generating more enter or generating more card advantage, or she can also open lanes, which is like super relevant when you're trying to go aggro because it's like again trying to reduce the cost as much as possible. She just becomes free lane clears if you need that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And that was the thing I noticed too is so I've gotten pretty harsh on Nanashi, right? Like I really wanted Nanashi in my Bang deck back two what 2 3 sets ago, and I really went for it. And the more and more I played it, the more and more I was just like, this is a less defensive Machina in that build specifically. However, the more I realized that Nanashi really was better in a deck where you need the filtering and you need the enter charge, and then the lane clearing is a nice optional thing to have as well, right? Like in that order kind of deal. And when I
Yeah,
was
and
playing
that's
against you, I was trying to poke at your to keep like try to enter starve you a little bit. I was trying to discard you down a little bit, and I found I couldn't really do it very successfully because Nanashi, like you just had the ability to keep on trucking a little bit longer.
Yeah, and that's part of the appeal too, is like not only is it card draw, it's like specific card draw. If there's a specific card you need out of the trash, she goes and gets it. So if I need an Animirage, or if I need, like if I haven't once per game, then I need the Erebus, or I can grab a Polaris to mill you, or I can get a Nobunaga to get double crush. Like there's a lot of weird tech cards that I put in the deck specifically that work. Like I don't really need a couple more than one or two copies of this card because it'll probably be in the trash and Nanashi can go get it for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so that clearly worked out for you, and we got the general idea of what you were trying to build with the deck. So, can you give any shout outs to like specific card choices that really, really worked well for you at the GP?
Sure. So other than like the obvious ones like Pure Look and Erebus, literally are designed to combo with uh, the Carnival, either the once per game or the once per turn effects. So like
Mm-hmm,
that's why
mm-hmm.
they're in there. I was very pleasantly surprised with how well Guzuko went, because she's a sort of like a three card combo with both Carnival and Pyrrhic, where you can play Pyrrhic, you can discard Guzuko to Carnival, and then they both see her enter from the trash and both of their effects trigger. So now you're getting a -3 and a -2, which is kind of cute.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
again, she also has pay 3 coins to bring a Signy back from the trash to the field, which again, going along with all of these weird combo tech choices, is another way to, if for example I need um, Nanashi to like gain enter for something else, or if I needed to open a lane, like Guzuko can also bring something back from the trash, which is something that I did use as well. Because like there's a couple coin spenders. The Pyrrhic as a coin spender in this specific deck is not good because you're just not doing enough discard for it to matter.
Sure.
But other than that, the only other coin effect is Matahari, which is extremely powerful. But like if your opponent's signies are too big, or you're in a situation where it just doesn't matter, like you can spend the coins on Guzuko and at least get value from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that one was pretty good. I was also very, very happy with Boomer Memoria. There was in our game specifically, you went first, so I was first attacking at level 1. I played Umar Memoria. I flipped the top card of the deck, and it was Matahari, and I was like, "Oh, cool! I can open a lane for free." So that's like exactly the situation you want to be in. Um, the other thing that I noticed as I was, this was not a conscious choice that I made as I was building the deck, but at least in the GP deck that I brought, every single life burst I have, with a half exception of Diabride, who also kind of does it. Every single one of them is at least +1 on card advantage. They either get me a card back, they draw me cards. I can get cards from the trash. Tristan is a +3 if the life burst hits, like the servants, obviously. So that was another. It wasn't like conscious choice, but as I was going through it, I was like, it's weird that I just haven't run out of cards. And then I looked at all of the life bursts, and I was like, oh, every single one of these fills up my hand. So it's another way that like I hadn't considered doing that type of thing in an aggro deck. Like I didn't make the conscious choice to do it, but it always felt like I had enough options, just because all the life burst package in general. Diabride also can vanish a Signy, but she also is just draw a card,
Yep.
which ended up being the mode that mattered because a lot of times they just weren't down, unfortunately. But still, again, having those kind of options, because some of them also like pull from the top three, like Umar pulls from the top three. Hyacinth is draw 2 and enter charge 1, which is a really good life burst. It's just unfortunate that her enter effect isn't quite as powerful as I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think all that stuff, because like again, you expect like 3-ish life bursts just mathematically to hit, and getting those 3 extra cards plus or minus, it ended up really mattering because I was never in a situation where I was like, I literally cannot feel lanes because I either had it from the life bursts, or if the life burst didn't hit, I had Nanashi to get it back, or potentially Guzuko, or um, Pyrrhic is, with Carnival, is a free +1 as well, so you can discard. It's not in a situation where you can actually use it, but you can prepare for the next turn potentially that way as well. If you're like, oh, I'm out of cards, you can discard for free to Paralook to fill the lane, and then at the end of turn, draw a card for the following turn.
Yep, yep, yep. And something else I also noticed is that you've got the Hakat as well as the Umir, and I kind of put those on the same level. I always joked on the podcast that Umir is basically Hakat light. It's like Hakat light with a life burst, right? So you ended up running like five different ways to really smooth out your hand in terms of like constantly just always having the right thing to come up for your next turn. You talked about that a little bit right just a second ago, where you're saying just prepping for the next turn as well.
Yeah, yeah, and both of those especially help too because again, there are a lot of tech cards, or there are a lot of cards like Tristan is a vanilla 10K, which I mean, having a 10K level two is not irrelevant, but if you have the option of that or something else, it's like, well, I'll probably just try to get something else because then you can potentially draw into a Lancelot or whatever. There's also some weird stuff with again, also with both Hyacinth and Carnival, where you can, with Haket or with Umar, you can look at the top cards of your deck and be like, okay, this is not a card I want, but I really need the red enter. So if it is a Tristan, for example, it's like, okay, I don't really want Tristan, but if I play Hyacinth, if I discard a Hyacinth, now I'm enter charging the Tristan and I get the red and I remove the Tristan from the deck. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cute.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, having that control, especially when you're running as many combo oriented cards as the deck runs, it really made it a lot more consistent. I think in the end that I was like, so of all 9 games I played, I was never in a situation where I was waiting for an Erebus on the once per game turn. The only time where there was one game where I got really lucky and I flipped into a Servant Life Burst and was able to pull it back from the trash. But other than that, the other 8 games, I always had the Erebus on the once per game turn, or I very frequently had Paraluck as soon as I hit 3 to get that extra value, just because of all that added card filtering as well.
So let me ask you some questions in the Elrig deck too. This one's a pretty simple question to ask, but I think it actually probably will help our viewers out a little bit. Out of Carnival's three abilities that you can choose from, draw a card, enter charge one, or put Signy into the trash, um, which effect did you use the most during the GP?
During the GP, I use the draw card because the deck is very aggro focused. Usually around that point is when you start struggling to find guards, and that's a potential way to dig for a guard. And again, it also does set up the next turn. Usually, it's the kind of thing where if you're not doing anything with a card, even if you like don't have Pure Look on the field, being able to cycle a card in your hand for free is potentially really useful. The intercharging helps sometimes depending on the current game state, just because like if you're at like one enter, you can be like, okay, I'll intercharge, and then I can pretty well guarantee that I can Madoka clap next turn if I need to, type of thing. I didn't use the trashing very often. I think I used it maybe 2 or 3 times in total. Um, just because the deck is so aggro focused that there was literally nothing for me to trash by the time she attacked in almost every single situation. So as I said, I did watch your videos where if you're playing a more mid range or controlling, I can definitely see that being very useful. But the way that this deck specifically is built, the trashing effect was just very rarely ever relevant.
Totally,
Um,
totally makes sense. Plus, also, even if in scenarios where if you're more of an aggro deck with the Carnival, just getting your hand down to zero is actually beneficial to you sometimes, and just exchanging the card instead of letting your opponent just strip it away, exchanging it for an enter sometimes is pretty huge.
Yeah, as if I was against like I faced one Aya deck and 2 Madoka decks, as I said. So in those situations, I tended to lean toward the enter because I was like, I'm just going to discard this card anyway. Like it doesn't really matter unless it was specifically like a servant type of thing where I had
Hmm.
one in hand. Obviously I wasn't going to pitch that. But if I'm like, I have one card in hand, he's going to grow into Aya and make me discard it, or he's going to like Madoka, or again, even not even the centers. Like if I'm expecting a monument or whatever, like against you, I think I intercharged twice because I was like, I'm just gonna have to discard this card anyway. Like I can at least turn it into a resource that I can use in some other fashion at some other point.
Yeah, totally. Ultra superheroes clearly very strong. Most people know it as the Esper thing, but it does have a different text on there if you're playing the Grixis build. How useful was the idea of just being able to vanish something and mill, like especially as an aggro deck?
Yeah, the milling was huge. The reason I played the card was for the mill, like because that in conjunction with Polaris is basically guaranteed a refresh, which is the most powerful form of damage you can have access to. So it's funny just because of the way that all of the aggro synergy and the fact that I kind of go hard. There were a couple times where I was like, oh, I kind of like out aggroed myself, and like if I use the ultra superheroes, there's just nothing left because I once per game type of thing. Like if you once per game right on three, you could use the ultra superheroes there, but there were times where I just didn't need to because like I had a Matahari and I could just not spend the enter and wait a turn and use it on the following turn.
Hmm.
Um, but still, having that as an option is always really good, especially as it gets later in the game. I've played a lot of aggro. I tend to be an aggro player in Wheatcross in general, and the thing that I noticed about aggro decks is usually around turn four and especially turn five, they just run out of gas and there's
Yep.
nothing left. But if I can save an Ultra Superheroes, or if I can save an Nanashi Selection, or if I can save the once per game, having that flexibility like means that even in turn five or turn six, like you can still pretty easily open lanes without much. Sometimes you don't even need to spend the enter if you have like the Nanashi, or if you have, if you go Pyrrholook into Guzuko into Ana Mirage, like I guess that one would spend an enter, but yeah, there's a lot of incidental minus effects that can stack up and really kind of get you there.
Yeah, and speaking about being an aggro deck, it's a little bit of a weird choice, but maybe a cool choice. Can't Stop Pretty. I think if I'm gonna guess the reason, did you choose Can't Stop Pretty as the second piece just because you were like, well, I've got enough damage output, but I need to make up for Nanashi Selections a little bit of its passivity.
Yeah, so that was kind of the theory in general. I was also wanted like at least some element of tech against a Dash Harana that wasn't just Madoka Clap, because I didn't know what to expect in terms of how many people would bring it. It's not a deck that I've faced really very often, so I was like, okay, maybe this will work. Um, it just ended up not really mattering in the long run, partially because I was against these Esper decks that like for me, paying an enter and then exceeding to make them discard three cards, I mean, it's fine, but like I'm not really doing anything with that.
Mm,
So it was all the cards really in both the Signy and the Elrig deck, it was probably the one that disappointed me the most, just because it wasn't really ever impactful enough for me to feel like, okay, this is a worthy include. So in my current builds since the GP, I have removed it. I tried doing Don't Stop, which is the one where when you attack, you either force your opponent to pay one or discard a card if they want to guard for your Elrig attack. That one, again, you like it's so aggro that that one doesn't matter, so I wouldn't recommend that one. The one I'm currently planning, I haven't played with it yet, but I'm trying Azure Black Gaia just to see maybe some added discard support, because that also, again, with the whole theme of being flexible and bringing cards back, like that will give me cards back from the trash as well. So that's one that I'm leaning towards. Was talking with Dylan and his build because I believe at the GP he brought countdown heals, and I know Hellfire is also toying with the Carnival build and using that. So that's um, that piece is pay one, and you can return a level one, level two, and level three Signy of the same class from your trash to your hand, which in this specific deck would be like Matahari, Lancelot, and Nobunaga, which is a pretty nice trio to have, to be honest. So I can definitely see that one being a nice replacement as well. I haven't settled exactly where that second piece is going to end up, but yeah, again, partially just because I wasn't really facing a lot of aggro. It felt like Can't Stop Pretty wasn't too important. Um, but even in like again, I guess Deus Adams is a little bit both draw aggro. That one just it made no impact at all in that game.
yep.
So the fact that I'm using a more defensive piece, like I feel like I just need to lean into aggro more and just kind of go that route, and having some more card advantage effects instead is probably the way to go. You can also, as always, make a case for like Xeno Cluster. Like that one also makes sense.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot in the air in terms of what that piece should be that I still haven't quite decided on yet.
Azure Black Gaia is actually a pretty cool choice. I mean, the fact that it makes it discard at random means a lot to an aggro player, right? Because targeted discard doesn't really do much in We Cross. If you're the aggro deck, they're just going to discard their most superfluous card. But random means you can hit a guard, you can hit some key cards off of it. That's pretty good. Plus, it gets you back some of your key pieces as well.
Yeah, and that's also the thought behind it as well. Like if I can hit a guard with it, then awesome. Like that's already basically paid for itself. So that's I'm hoping that it's the downside is it costs obviously more enter. So, but now part of the reason I was this was the at the GP I was still running Hyacinth, so I was just generating a lot of enter in general. But I think the deck has enough enter to support running that as an option. Just again, because if you do run out of enter, you have the option to pay it into Carnival and just generate more enter. Like if, for example, like the cards you need aren't immediately valuable from the Azure Black Eye, when you use it, you can at least cycle one of them for an enter, which
Yep.
is having that flexibility is kind of really nice.
Yeah, makes total sense. So I'm looking at this new deck list you sent over for me for this sort of like current updated build that you're at. One of the things that I'm noticing is that you've definitely taken out the Hyacinth, but you've added in Yuzuki as seems like a replacement.
Yeah, so that was one. That's one that Dylan was running, and he said he was extremely pleased with how well Yuzuki worked. I haven't had enough time to know for certain whether or not it's useful. It seems like again, being the aggro deck, and being in situations where I had like way too much enter to, I literally could not spend all the enter I had in a few of the games because I was at like 8 enter on turn four. I was like, I can full pay for Madoka and still have 3 enter to do whatever, right? So potentially using that to burn away some enter, which could like, if they're potentially threatening a 3 stop, you can reduce that as an option. Also, the fact that she's red, like being in the red center, you want to have more red options. Part of the reason I was running Hyacinth is because I was running Can't Stop Pretty in addition to Madoka Collapse. I was like, okay, I need a little bit more blue enter to make sure I can actually play both of those things.
Hmm.
But without being on, Azure Black Eye is colorless, so I don't have that as much of a need to have as much blue. And I feel like, having one blue is a lot easier to just, as soon as you get a blue, you kind of just hold on to it until you need the clap, right? So
Yep.
that's basically the thoughts there.
And it looks like the other card that you added that's kind of a big include is the Nanashi.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who talked to me about this card. That's not one that I looked at beforehand, and I kind of wish I had. So what I've done is I've replaced. There was a halberd that was in the deck partially just for timing reasons because I just didn't have the ability to. I didn't have any Nanashis. I was originally going to run Rill, but I just didn't pull any out of my boxes and it couldn't get there in time for the GP. So I replaced a halberd and I replaced one of the Arabises with a Nanashi because it's a similar kind of effect where you can do this sort of board wipe effect,
Yep.
which again with the once per game is very powerful. I didn't want to like solely rely on the Nanashi just because, um, like if you're in a situation where you can't find it or you need a level three as the pure look type of thing, maybe you need like pure look and 2/2s depending on what your grow level is. Um, so I still think Erebus is probably the way to go on the actual combo turn, but Nanashi is like something to not sneeze at as well because again she can hit things that are even bigger, and even if you're not on a combo turn, like she can still open lanes pretty effectively if you need that as an option as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you were to negative and freeze something else with the negative 2000, this then lets you go negative 5000 on something and then negative 3000 on two things. So you can rack that up to be technically a negative 8000 and a negative 5000. That basically kills any level ones that are in front of you, period.
Yeah,
And a lot of
yeah,
level
for sure.
twos, to be honest with you.
Yeah, like obviously it's a very powerful effect. I also was somewhat wary because it is an attack trigger. So you could be in a situation where you're like, okay, cool. Like they have 3 lanes that are 2 servant zeros and like, whatever, maybe they have a Hecate or something that's like you're gonna wipe them all with just an Anashi attack. Now, if they like grow into like a Madoka Smash and just banish the Nanashi, now your entire attack is nullified. So,
Hmm.
like, if you're depending on what assists you're expecting, like, you still may want to lean into the Erebus because the fact that you can just banish them before you attack is like there's value to that, right? So it's going to depend more on game state and specifically what assists you're expecting in terms of which one you lean into more. But having that option, I think, is really nice.
Certainly. All right. Well, I think that covers all the stuff on the build, the GP, and stuff that we're going to. If anyone wants to watch some of you, and you've done some other deck techs too before that you've played around with, where do they get a hold of you? Where do they watch on YouTube?
So I am on YouTube at the Real Quaid. There is lately it's been a lot of just unboxing videos just because there hasn't really been a lot of content. I do have some older deck techs, some general like I don't want to call them like intro strategies, but sort of like first steps. A lot of the stuff is like team specific videos, which are nowadays are probably not as relevant. I do have some really old ceremony footage of like the ceremony where I took Wolf to 5 and 2, which was really funny. And then I have some, older card jockey stuff and some of the older ceremonies. But
Let's
um,
not say count old stuff out. There was a Team Nova that made it to top 8.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, you're not wrong. So maybe that will change things in the future. But so yeah, there's some videos there, and obviously a lot of WeCross stuff, and so yeah, and you can find me in various WeCross Discord channels as well.
Yeah, and I will link to your YouTube down below as well as your original deck tech for this. So I gotta say, man, thank you for coming on the channel. I'm excited for our next 3v3 tournament that we're probably doing at some point.
Yeah, likewise. Hopefully we'll get some good. I don't know what the teams are going to look like, to be honest. It's been a while. Like the last time we did it, the only team options we really had were like the new Diva teams, but now we have like Tama as an option, which we
Yep,
wouldn't have before. So yeah, it's going to be a real interesting shakeup once those start coming in.
yeah, absolutely. All right, dude, I will see you later. And hey, I hope you always flip a life burst.
I do too. Thank you.